thank you. I told Amy what a great job she did. It's not easy to stand up here and talk, and particularly about something so personal and important. And I'm very grateful that she did this evening. I'm delighted to be here. Bob Dawson, thank you for having us here in the school that you are the principal. Kelsey, thank you for greeting me as the president of the senior class. That was an amazing rendition of our national anthem. I thank you. There she is, right there. Emma, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. This is my first town hall since I became an official candidate today at the Secretary of State's office. And I'm so excited about the next 3 months as I travel around New Hampshire talking in small groups and large, answering your questions, as I will in a few minutes, so that we can really understand what's at stake in this election. Because that's what motivates me. I hear a story like Amy's, and it just makes me want to redouble my efforts. Because I'm someone who believes that we can get beyond partisan politics, get out of all the sniping and the arguing, and roll up our sleeves again, get on the same team, the American team, and solve the problems that our country faces. I believe strongly that we have to have an economy that works for everybody again. It will not surprise you to hear me say that I believe, and I think the evidence supports my belief, that our economy works better when we have a Democrat in the White House. And I know that's going to be one of the big points of debate between Democrats and Republicans. But I view it like this. You know, after the election of 2008, I got a call from President-elect Obama, asked me to come see him in Chicago. I didn't know why. Turned out he wanted me to be Secretary of State. But before we got to that, we were just sitting, the two of us talking, and he said, you know, it's so much worse than they told us. And indeed it was. It was the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. 800,000 people were losing their jobs a month in America. Before it was over, 9 million lost their jobs, 5 million lost their homes, and $13 trillion of family wealth was wiped out. And this is not ancient history, because it wasn't easy to avoid it getting even worse, falling into a Great Depression. And I don't think President Obama gets the credit he deserves for making sure that did not happen. And I want us, now that we are standing, to start running again. What does that mean? It means we've got to see incomes rising again. It is absolutely unacceptable that we have recovered jobs, but people are not feeling the results. They're not getting ahead and feeling like they can stay ahead. So what I've been doing is proposing a series of economic policies that I would pursue as president. And at the center of them is creating more good jobs and rising incomes. And there are several ways we can go at this. First of all, we need to have more good jobs created by fixing the physical infrastructure of this country that is in bad repair, which gets a failing grade from those who are experts. Our bridges, our roads, our tunnels, our airports, our rail systems. We can put millions of people to work and become more competitive economically. It makes no sense to me that we can't get bipartisan agreement on making the investments that will make us richer and stronger and safer in the future. We can also create millions of new jobs and businesses by combating climate change and making a transition to become the clean energy superpower of the 21st century. This is something else I don't understand. You know, in the 2008 Republican platform, there was a commitment to combating climate change and a commitment to clean renewable energy. Now, 7 years later, heading into another election, the candidates on the other side, you ask them about climate change and they say something like, well, I'm not a scientist. You know, my reaction to that is go talk to a scientist and actually listen, because it is a serious, real problem, but it's also an opportunity. There is no reason we can't, in this transition away from fossil fuels, using wind and solar and advanced biofuels, have an economy that is going to be even stronger. You know, when I'm not in New Hampshire, I spend a lot of time in Iowa. They're already getting one-third of their electricity from wind. They have an unemployment rate below 5% because they got really smart. They not only are installing the wind turbines, they're now manufacturing them. And they're using their community colleges to help train young people to have the skills they need in advanced manufacturing. Every wind turbine has 8,800 parts. So they can't fill all the jobs for machinists and tool and die makers. So they have more than 7,000 people already working in wind. There's so much we can do, but we're locked in this really unfortunate debate where we're not doing what we're capable of doing. So I will support the steps that the president has taken on clean energy, on combating climate change, but I want to go further. I want us to set some big goals. By the end of my first term, I want us to have installed 500 million more solar panels, and I want us, by the end of my second term, to have enough clean energy to power every home in America. And today, I was honored to receive the endorsement of the League of Conservation Voters. And I was especially pleased because they looked specifically at what I've been proposing. And they also looked at what I did as Secretary of State to move this debate forward. Because somebody's going to be the clean energy superpower of the 21st century. Most of the technology is American invented. We started it. But it's not going to be us unless we are in to win it. And we can be. The third thing I want to do to get incomes rising and more good jobs is I want to be the small business president. I want to make sure that we clear the decks of the obstacles to starting and growing a small business in America today. And right now, we're not doing the way we used to, being top in the world in creating small businesses. Credit hasn't returned in the way that it needs to since the Great Recession. We need to take a hard look at state and local regulations and licensing and try to move through that thicket so more people can get started. The Small Business Administration plays an important role. I remember when I visited Smutty Nose Brewery, and they were telling me about how they pieced together help from the Small Business Administration and other, federal grants and the kinds of things that they needed to expand their facility. So we've got to take small business more seriously. I intend to do that. My dad was a small businessman. I know 60% of the new jobs will come from there. We also need to make sure that the tax code quits favoring the wealthy and we create a more fair, level playing field for the middle class. I've been calling for some of these things for years now. I called to end the carried interest loophole. I called to end the tax deductions and the other benefits that corporations get for moving jobs overseas. I'm going to do everything I can as your president to finally get a tax system that works for the vast majority of Americans, not just for those who can afford the people to go and argue with Congress to get what they need out of it. And we're going to deal with some of the injustices in the system that have put too much of a burden on the middle class and too little of a burden on the wealthiest, because they should pay their fair share for making this country work. And finally, there's a lot of other things I've been proposing. Those of you who are interested, please go to HillaryClinton.com and I'm going to be rolling out even more of my policies, and I'm paying for everything. I think that's important. You know, it was heartbreaking when my husband left a balanced budget and a surplus, and George W. Bush and the Republicans just blew it up. And it was so distressing to me. I was in the Senate. I thought, okay, we get there. We've got a balanced budget and a surplus. If we stay on this same path, we could actually pay down the national debt. But President Bush had other priorities, and one of them was slashing taxes much more than we could afford, 2 wars that he wouldn't pay 1 penny for, first time in American history that ever happened, taking his eye off of the financial markets and the mortgage markets, and you know where we ended up. So everything I'm proposing, I have a plan to pay for it. But the final thing I want to mention about raising incomes seems pretty obvious, but bears repeating. And that is, finally, we're going to give women equal pay for equal work in this economy. And, you know, I got to tell you, I know that sometimes when I advocate for equal pay and raising the minimum wage, and which is a woman's issue too, because 2/3 of minimum wage workers are women, sometimes the Republicans accuse me of playing the gender card. And I have to tell you, if advocating for equal pay for equal work is playing the gender card, deal me in, because it is so wrong for us in 2015 to even be talking about this issue. And I cannot tell you how many people come up and raise it with me and tell me their story. I mean, one of the problems is there's no transparency in pay, and a lot of times people don't know they're not being paid equally. So I met a young man here in New Hampshire a couple of weeks ago. He said, I want to tell you why I'm for you. I said, great. He said, it's because I had my first real job when I was 17. I was a cashier in the same store where my mother worked. He said, I was really excited about it, and I went to work early, and I stayed late, and I did everything that I could. And then I took my paycheck home, and I showed it to my mom. And her face fell, and I looked at her, and he asked her, what's wrong? And she said, I've been working there for 4 years. You're making $1 more an hour than I am. I said, so how was that explained? And he said, well, I talked to the manager, and he said, well, we think a young man like you can go far. Now, that's nothing wrong with having a young man like that go far. But what about a woman who's worked there for 4 years being given a chance to get equal pay for doing the same job as her 17-year-old son was doing? This is wrong. And it will help our economy because it's not just a woman's issue. It's a family issue. It's an economic issue. We are a 70% consumption economy. And we're not going to recover to the full extent we can until people feel like they can spend money again because their incomes are going up and they have a brighter future ahead. And we need to make sure that we finally incentivize profit sharing the way Market Basket did, so that people who work get rewarded for their contributions to profitability, including the women who work there. Now, look, there's a lot of other things that go into growing the economy and becoming competitive. Education, top of the list. We're in this great high school here. But we got to start with early childhood education. It is not enough to have kids go to kindergarten when they've already had 5 years of life, and 80% of your brain is physically formed by the age of 3. And so then, if you're not getting the stimulation and the opportunities that we give our granddaughter, for example, you are going to start out behind in kindergarten. And then we turn to the teachers and we say, close the achievement gap. They had nothing to do with creating it. The conditions in the family, the neighborhood, the community did. And we've got to have universal pre-K with a priority given to disadvantaged kids so they can go as far as their hard work and talent will take them. And when it comes to K through 12 education, I have this old-fashioned idea that we ought to actually listen to teachers who are in the classrooms and know the names of the students about what works and what doesn't work. And we've got to make college affordable again, because we are pricing middle-class kids, working family kids, poor kids out of going to college. I've run the numbers on this. We can make community college free. It can be like the 2-year extension to comprehensive high school that we made free back at the beginning of the last century. But that's not enough for most people to be able to get the qualifications and the skills they need for jobs. So we should do that. But I also have a plan called the New College Compact that will enable middle-class, working families, poor families to send their kids to a 4-year public college or university without having to borrow anything for tuition. And that will open the doors again to a lot of kids who are being shut out right now. And the other part of that puzzle is the enormous student debt that young people and their families are carrying. How many people here have or had student debt? I did. I mean, I borrowed to go to law school. My father didn't have money for that. He helped me in college. I had to work. But then when I said I was going to law school, he said, well, you're on your own. And now we have 40 million Americans with student debt totaling $1.2 trillion. That is a drag on their futures, and it's a drag on our economy. I want us to... Okay, yeah, it's a powerful idea, refinancing student debt. But think about it. You can refinance your mortgage. You can refinance your car payment. Corporations can certainly refinance their debt, and we don't let families and students refinance theirs. If you currently have student debt, does anybody have a student debt interest rate 8% or higher that you're aware of? Yeah? Yeah, I ask this question in a lot of places, and literally I've had answers between 8 and 12%. What's yours? 7%. I mean, and we've had close to zero interest rates. And we're making students and their families pay this. And I'll tell you another thing. When I'm president, the federal government is not going to make a profit off of lending money to young people to be able to go to college and complete it. Now, I appreciated what Amy said about the Affordable Care Act, because I will defend it. It is a major step forward, but there are improvements we need to make in it. But I will not let us go back to a contentious debate where 18 million people have to start all over again, and we don't have the safety net that it now provides, and where insurance companies can charge you more because of a pre-existing condition, maybe so much that you can't afford the insurance, or where women, we're charged more than men. We're not going back there, but we do have to make improvements in the Affordable Care Act. And among some of those, we've got to get more competition in the insurance market. Right now, we're having all these consolidations between these great big insurance companies, and that's going to limit the market, and it will be much more difficult to have affordable insurance, whether you're in a private plan or you're on the exchanges. We have to somehow get the out-of-pocket costs to be lower and more manageable. The high deductibles and the other kind of out-of-pocket costs are sometimes more than people can afford right now. And we've got to deal with the problem of increasing prescription drug costs. It is going up 12% last year, and it makes no sense. There's no economic sense for it other than monopoly power and the ability to pretty much set the price, because in our country, we don't let anybody negotiate for a lower drug price except the VA, because the drug companies have prevented us from doing that. So here's what happens to all of us. Our tax dollars support the NIH, which is a partner with many drug companies in doing the research. Our tax dollars support the FDA, which is the means by determining whether drugs are safe and effective and therefore can be put on the market. And then we end up paying a higher price for those very same drugs we've already invested in than anybody else in the advanced world. I represented New York for 8 wonderful years. And as you know, we have a long border with Canada. Every week, people would get on buses and go across to Canada to buy the very same drugs at a much more affordable price, because the drug companies had to negotiate with the Canadian government to actually be able to sell the drugs, just like they have to in Europe or Australia or Japan. And we deny Medicare, the biggest drug purchaser in the world, we deny Medicare the right to negotiate a better deal. Well, I'm going to go right at that, because at some point, this is not an issue that we should be arguing about. We should be having an arm's length negotiation. Now, the drug companies will say right away, but wait, you're going to interfere with research. Well, here's my deal. We give you a tax break for advertising, and you've seen those ads. I mean, really. I mean, everybody's running through fields of wildflowers. They look so blissful. Whatever the drug is, it's in small print at the bottom of the screen. And the voice is saying, if you take this, your nose will fall out and all those things like that. But, I mean, it's pretty enticing. Well, they spend more on advertising than they do on research. So we're going to take away the tax break for advertising. If they want to pay for it, they pay for it on their dime, not with tax support. And that way, they can put more money into research, and we're going to have to go after the monopoly power. You all remember the case about a month and a half ago, the guy who bought the small drug company whose only product was a drug that is used to battle a parasitic infection that affects people whose immune systems are depressed, primarily HIV/AIDS, and it's a necessary drug to keep them alive. And this guy buys it, and all of a sudden he raises the price 5,000% because he can. And doctors and medical experts and ethicists are all saying, wait a minute, you can't do that. These people need this. So he says, go figure out how to pay for it. Well, then that comes out of insurance policies, which raises everybody else's costs, or it comes out of government funds, which raises everybody else's costs. So we need to address this. Now, there's a lot that we have to do to really build on the progress that we've made and not let it be ripped away and send us back the other direction. But one of the biggest differences that I see with our Republican counterparts is their all-out attack on human rights and women's rights and civil rights and gay rights and voting rights. It's quite astonishing. And so I have made it very clear. I will defend a woman's right to choose, and I will defend Planned Parenthood from these kinds of attacks that are really so unfair and wrong. I will also defend and implement marriage equality, and I will stand up for ending discrimination against the LGBT community in our country. I mean, think about this. It's now legal for you to get married on Saturday and get fired on Monday. I mean, we've got to tackle this. I will also defend voting rights. I thought that debate was over in the 1960s, and here it is, back again. And I have advocated that every 18-year-old be automatically registered to vote. I will also go after the Citizens United decision that is corrupting our politics. Now, I think the next president could get 3 appointments to the Supreme Court. I will be interested in appointing justices who care more about your right to vote than a billionaire's right to buy an election with dark, unaccountable money. And I have said that if it takes a constitutional amendment, which unfortunately retired Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens says it will, to try to reverse the pernicious effects of Citizens United, we're going to have to look at that because we've got to get this back in balance. I voted for, remember, the McCain-Feingold bill? I mean, I voted for it because I thought it was important for us to rein in campaign finance. And, you know, unfortunately, the litigation against it argued that it denied people their rights and all the rest. We have got to get a better system than what we currently have. I will also defend Social Security against privatization, Medicare against voucherization, and I will work hard to fix the VA, but I will defend it from efforts by those who wish to privatize it. It needs to work. It needs to be held to a high standard. But I do not believe it would be best for our veterans to be thrown into the private insurance market, especially given a lot of the specialized needs they have. We just have got to do whatever it takes to improve the system. I will also continue to work for comprehensive immigration reform, which I think is in our country's interest, both economically and socially. And I will do everything I can to take on the gun lobby and get sensible gun safety measures passed for America again. Now, 90 people a day die from gun violence in America. 90. Homicides, suicides, and tragic avoidable accidents. And that's 33,000 people a year. A majority of Americans and a majority of gun owners in America believe we should have universal background checks, that we should close the gun show loophole, close the online loophole, close what's now called the Charleston loophole, where the guy got a gun, which he never was entitled to because he actually had a felony conviction, but they didn't find out in time, and the rule is 3 days you get the gun, and he used it to murder those 9 people in church. And we need to reverse the immunity from liability that the Congress voted to give gun makers and gun sellers. And here's an example of why that's important. The man who went into the movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, remember? He bought a huge amount of ammunition online from a seller called Lucky Gunner. He didn't have to pass a background check. Nobody could look him in the eye and say, wait a minute, there's something off about this guy, or maybe we don't want to do this, or you come back in a few days after we've checked you out. He just put in the order and he got it. And one of the families of a young woman who was murdered by him sued to say, you know, how can you have no accountability at all, no legal responsibility whatsoever to sell weapons and ammunition online? And they brought a lawsuit, and because of the law that the Congress passed giving immunity, they lost. And then to add insult to injury and to grief, under a state law, they were told they had to pay the NRA $200,000 for the legal defense of the guy they sued. This is crazy, folks. I mean, there's nobody standing out there wanting to take your gun if you're a responsible American. But personally, I don't want fugitives, felons, stalkers, domestic abusers, terrorists being able to go buy guns without any background check and anybody standing in the way. So we have a lot of work to do in our country, and we also have challenges overseas. I went to 112 countries as your Secretary of State. I was always so proud to be representing our country in whatever place I was. And I know how important that we maintain American leadership and that we lead by our values and furtherance of our interests, and to advance our security and that of our friends and our partners and our allies around the world. And when I hear the Republicans talk, they fall into 2 camps. There's the one camp, which is the answer to everything, more soldiers and bombs. And the other camp, we shouldn't get involved with anybody anywhere, just pull up the gangplank and retreat. There is no substitute for American leadership. There's not any group, any nation that will step in who shares our values if we retreat. Now, when I hear the Republicans talk like that, I'm also usually mentioned in the conversation. Honestly, sometimes I wonder what they would talk about if I weren't around. But, they go on and on about, oh, what has she ever done and all that stuff. They go on and on. So I listened to this for a while, and then I thought, well, maybe they just don't know. So I sent them all a copy of my book, Hard Choices, about my 4 years in the State Department. And, I thought if they were interested in how you pull together an international coalition, including China and Russia, to put crippling sanctions on Iran to drive them to the negotiating table, they could read about it. It's in there. Or if they wanted to maybe find out how you get a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas by negotiating with the Muslim Brotherhood president in Cairo, I wrote about that too. I also said, look, there's so many of you, you could have a book club, and you could read this and kind of discuss it among yourselves. And I haven't gotten one thank you note, but I'm still waiting. We're all kind of busy right now. Look, today at the state capitol, when I signed my papers, and there's a big crowd in the corridor shaking my hand and clapping, and then I went outside and I talked to the crowd out there. A lot of people say to me, gosh, how do you do this? I mean, how can you keep doing this? And I'll tell you why. I mean, I feel so blessed that I'm an American. I'm the granddaughter of a factory worker from Scranton, Pennsylvania, who came here as a child immigrant and went to work in the lace mills. And he worked really hard. And he did it to support his family, of course, but he did it to give his 3 sons a better life. And he did. Each of them went to college. My dad graduated from college in the middle of the Depression and hopped a freight train from Scranton to Chicago because he heard there was a job he could get, and he became a salesman. And then when World War II started, he joined the Navy, and he trained sailors who were being sent off to fight in the Pacific. And when he died, I got letters from some of those sailors, including pictures of my dad standing there in his chief petty officer uniform with rows and rows of young men in their whites going off to defend our country. And my mother had a very different experience. She was rejected, neglected, abandoned by her parents, sent to live with grandparents who didn't want her. And by the age of 14, she was out on her own working as a housemaid. So her family gave up on her, but America didn't give up on her. And she never got to go get that college degree, which she wanted so much. But she made sure I did. And I'm standing here before you 3 generations later from my grandfather, asking you to support me for president, because that's the story that I was raised to believe in, that I have lived, and that I want to make sure is real for Americans today. We have this amazing 13-month-old grandchild now, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure she has every opportunity in life. But I have to tell you, that's not enough. It really matters what kind of country she becomes an adult in, what kind of world is out there waiting for her. And it also really matters that every other kid in our country has the same chance to live up to his or her God-given potential. And I got to tell you, you shouldn't have to be the granddaughter of a former president to be able to take advantage of the chances and blessings America has offered. You should be able to be the granddaughter of a factory worker or the grandson of a truck driver. And I'm going to do everything I can as your president to make sure that is real. Thank you all.
I'm the daughter of a Marine Corps officer who fought in Korea and Vietnam. I think you're going to be inheriting ISIS, and I'm wondering how you're going to prepare for that if you're thinking boots on the ground. In that case, what are you going to do when the first POW gets executed and it's streamed live to the world? If you could address that, I'd appreciate it.
As I said very briefly, we have a lot of opportunities in the world, and we have a lot of threats and dangers. And ISIS is the first kind of internet terrorist network. They are very adept at recruiting, propagandizing, even training. and setting up attacks. So I think that it's imperative that we be constantly working with other nations who have a more immediate danger from ISIS, even though I believe the danger goes far beyond the Middle East. And we should be willing to recognize that. So here is where I think the United States is right now and what I support and what I would do in addition. Defense Secretary Carter said the other day that our new strategy is what he called the 3 R's: Raqqa, Ramadi, and raids. Raqqa is the city they operate out of in northern Syria. Ramadi is the Iraqi city that they captured, which is a center of northern central Iraq, a Sunni city. And raids is what the president has decided we're going to be doing more of by committing special ops forces. But there is no military solution to ISIS unless we get a better coordinated effort from an Iraqi army that will fight, from the Kurds who will be able to focus on ISIS and not be constantly having to fight rearguard actions against the Turks and others who are worried about their ability to establish some territorial holds. With the Russians now, with the latest information about their plane being perhaps bombed, having to decide, are they really most focused on Assad's enemies or on their own? Because ISIS did take credit, although it's not yet been totally concluded that's what happened. So we've got to do intensive diplomacy to get everybody on the same page. ISIS poses a very serious threat to the region, and because they are recruiting fighters from Europe, a few from the United States who have passports that are going to enable them to travel around, there has to be a much more focused and sustainable effort against them. And we have to do, as I think Ash Carter rightly said, everything we can to try to take out their support systems in Raqqa, their supply chains, their recruitment mechanisms, and we have to get the Iraqi army in shape, working with the Kurdish Peshmerga to take back Ramadi and the other cities that they have taken over. We also have to try to disrupt their financing. You know, they are quite adept at stealing oil and selling it on the black market. They are also looting antiquities, and the ones they're not destroying, they are, you know, taking and selling a lot of what was left in sites and museums. So we've got to disrupt their financing mechanism. And finally, we have to be very clear about what we will do and what we won't do. And I believe we are going to have to continue air support and surveillance and intelligence and reconnaissance and special operators. But I don't believe we should at all consider putting American troops into the area to fight ISIS. If we can't get others to do that work, then we will have to have Plan B, where we try to contain them. But I'm betting that if we and others push hard and try to rebuild the Iraqi army that the former Prime Minister Maliki basically destroyed, and if we are able to support the Kurds, who are good fighters and have some reach, and if we get the Turks to pay attention to ISIS more than they are paying attention to the Kurds for at least a period of time, and if we get Russia and Iran to understand that there has to be a political settlement because it's the continuing civil war that has created the opportunity for a cancer like ISIS to take root and grow, and maybe the Russians will be more receptive now. I have advocated a no-fly zone, and by that I mean one in coalition working with the nations in the area and others who are flying missions against ISIS and other terrorist groups. They're not the only terrorist group, but they're the most sophisticated and broadly based territorially. And I think that if we can get the Russians on board and the Iranians and the Turks on board, what a no-fly zone would do is give us a chance to have some safe territories that we then could protect from ISIS and maybe stop the flow of refugees, because that's a tragedy in and of itself. So this is a highly complicated set of challenges that are presented to us. And there is no substitute for constant diplomacy. And, you know, I believed that before I became Secretary of State, and I really came out believing it even more, that no matter how hard the problem is, you have to keep working at it, and you have to keep trying to bring people to the table to be part of whatever the solution might be. And it beats, you know, rushing into war. And even though, you know, I supported the Iran agreement, as I said, I did the sanctions and I started the secret negotiations through Oman. And I mean, I don't trust the Iranians. I mean, who would? But the idea that we would immediately jump to the conclusion that the only way to try to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapons was through military action, I thought was, you know, too quick and not particularly well-founded. And this had been going on for a while. You know, look, I mean, the Iranians mastered the nuclear fuel cycle when George W. Bush was president. They built covert facilities when he was president. They were dashing to install as many centrifuges. And so when President Obama came into office, asked me to be Secretary of State, we thought if we didn't kind of disrupt that move that they were on, that we would have ended up with, you know, a nuclear weapon arsenal in Iran. So it was very painstaking. There was no easy shortcut to it. And I feel exactly the same way about what's going on in the Middle East right now. We need constant diplomatic effort, and we need to have some leverage, which is one of the other reasons that I support, you know, floating the no-fly zone idea, because we need some leverage to get people at the table that will then cooperate with us to go after what the primary goal of ISIS eradication is. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Okay, go ahead. You stood up, but then I want to get to some of the other parts of the room, too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
This is more homegrown here. I just want you to know a couple statements. First off, I've been with you since the cookie incident. I campaigned for you, and then it was a bitter pill, but I went with Obama after you didn't get it. As a student of history, I feel right now this country is as divided as since the Civil War. My question to you is, for the first time in all of the times I've listened to you, when you said the Republicans as your enemy, it was disheartening. I'm not asking you to retract it. What I'm asking you is, when you are president, would you please extend the olive branch and let us, because we're all Americans, Hillary.
Yeah, I agree with that. You know, I was answering, I think they sometimes view me that way, and that, you know, like the Iranians, et cetera. Now, when I was First Lady, when I was Senator, when I was Secretary of State, I always reached out to Republicans and worked closely with them. One of the things that, you know, we did, after, as Amy said in her introduction, was the Children's Health Insurance Program after we were not successful getting affordable care passed in my husband's administration. I worked with Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch. We reformed the adoption and foster care system. I worked with Tom DeLay. I got to the Senate. I worked with Lindsey Graham to provide TRICARE medical benefits to people in the National Guard. I have done that. I will continue to do that. I know how to find common ground. I know how to stand my ground. And I think that is how we need to go at it. But I also think this election is particularly important for people to listen carefully to what candidates are saying. Because it's been my experience that people who run for office and get elected actually try to do what they tell you they intend to do. And I think it would be a grave mistake to go back to trickle-down economics, to go back to giving tax breaks to the wealthy, to get out of the way of corporations, to avoid the dangers and the opportunities presented by climate change and everything I talked about earlier. So it will be a contentious election. And what I have found in my 20-plus years of experience in this arena is that when I'm in office, I have great relations with Republicans. they say wonderful things about me. When I'm running for office, it's a little different. And I get that. I understand that. But you can rest assured, at the base of political action are relationships, just like anything else in life. I will do whatever I can to find that common ground. And I hope there will be a lot of common ground. We just saw common ground on the Export-Import Bank in the House of Representatives. And, you know, I agreed with the Republicans who joined with Democrats. And they did it because the facts are pretty clear. Every other major country we compete with has some kind of system to support their exporters. And if we take that tool away, you're going to lose jobs in New Hampshire, and you're going to lose jobs across America that we shouldn't be losing. We're in a competitive global economy. I cite that as just one example. So Republicans bucked their leadership because they looked at the evidence. And I'm hoping that with the new leadership in the House, there will be some opportunities to find even more common ground. At least that's what I'm counting on. Yeah, right there. Yes, yeah. Yeah, here, let me hold this for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hillary, I was a fan of yours 20 years ago when you tried to improve health care. And I was disappointed that it didn't work out. So you understand the dynamics of health care in our country better than any other candidate. We're still the only developed country without universal health care. And while Obamacare has improved coverage, people are still going without care. Bernie Sanders has been advocating for Medicare for all. And with the freedom to choose your own doctor and low administrative costs compared to insurance companies, it's always sounded like the best way to go. Do you support Medicare for all? And if so, how likely is it to be passed? And if not, why not?
Well, first of all, I support Medicare, and I support it because it has one of the lowest administrative costs of any insurance provider in America. And it is demonized, and it is, you know, attacked all the time when the facts are quite contrary. Given it covers older people and sicker people, especially toward the end of life, it actually does an excellent job of providing that care. But there are problems with trying to move to a Medicare for all system in our country, because the majority of people in America get their health care through their employers, and maybe it's a choice we wouldn't have necessarily made, except during World War II it was a job recruiter and sustainer. But in every bit of work I've done, every research study I've shown, people are not ready to give up their private health care. And it is a very hard sell to try to convince them to do so. I think what the Affordable Care Act did was to do the best job, given the different views that exist in our country, and created an exchange program that does use insurers, but so it's sort of familiar to people, but with subsidies so that it can be afforded. Now, I know that a lot of people say, well, why can't we get from where we are? We would save money if we did get to a national health insurance plan. But even in the debate over the Affordable Care Act, the so-called public option, remember that? It wasn't popular enough to get the votes that it needed. So this is a very important and personal issue to me, because I think health care is the fundamental priority in people's lives. If you don't have your health, if you can't get the care you need for yourself and your families, you know, so much else just doesn't work right for you. And that's not just for physical health. We need to do so much more on mental health. We are totally ignoring what needs to be done on mental health. And also substance abuse, treatment for addiction. Those are two huge problems. So I guess my answer is it certainly is a system that many Americans wish we could get to. There is not much chance right now, I think, that we could make that transition. That's why I support and defend the Affordable Care Act, because it provides a stopgap. It provides the opportunity for people to get the health care they need. And when you think about how all the Republicans running are saying that they want to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and there have been more than 50 votes to do that in the Congress, I don't think we want to go back and start over again. I think we want to build a plan that actually works better and controls costs more effectively off of the Affordable Care Act. So that's where I'm coming from, and that's what I think is the most possible route to try to make sure people get the health care that they need at an affordable price. Oh, I love Girl Scouts. I was a Girl Scout. Come right up here. Here you go. Thank you for coming, and thank you for wearing that. Here you go.
My name's Tessa Soboleski, and my grandmother suffers with Alzheimer's disease, and I was wondering where you stand on supporting the research.
I am very much in favor of supporting research into Alzheimer's, and I'm very unhappy and sad that when those of you remember when the budget was negotiated and sequester was put in place, and it was across the board, it was indiscriminate. A lot of medical research, a lot of NIH programs were shut down because there was no money for them. And Alzheimer's took a particular hit in that because a lot of scientists tell me that we were making progress and then the money basically ran out. So I want us to invest in medical research. I want us to bring the National Institutes of Health back up to where they were and keep growing. It is one of our economic advantages. You know, our country spent, like $3-4 billion mapping the human genome, and then we did what we're the best at. We made the government investment. We created the new knowledge, and then we turned it over to the not-for-profit, and for-profit sectors in our country, and there has been $985 billion in new businesses and wealth created. So we're making a very short-sighted decision when we cut medical research, especially for a disease like Alzheimer's, because the numbers of people suffering is only going to grow. So the better we can intervene early, find better treatments, try to stop or prevent the disease, that's not only good for the families like your grandmother, that is good for our country, because the caregiving crisis that we are facing is driven by a number of conditions, but principally by Alzheimer's, because people are doing the best they can to take care of their loved ones. I've had 2 personal experiences about that right here in New Hampshire. At a town hall in Dover this summer, I called on a woman just like I call on people here, and she stood up and she said she was taking care of her spouse who has Alzheimer's and her mother who has Alzheimer's. And she said, I want to do it, but I need help. I don't have any help. And then I met a young man who is a teacher. He takes care of his mother, who's 84. She has Alzheimer's. He can't afford care for her. There's not enough facilities or resources that he can find to take her, and he can't quit his job, so he takes her to work. And we think about this in the personal stories like your grandmother, but we need to start thinking about it in a much more national way, because it's going to be a huge burden on families, predominantly but not exclusively women, many of whom will drop out of the workforce, many of whom will spend down their savings, and it's going to have a very negative effect on the lives of many Americans. We got to come to grips with what we're going to do to provide some respite care and some support and other alternatives so people can take care of the ones that they love, and research for sure. Yeah, we got lots of hands going up here. Yes, right there. Yeah, here comes a microphone right behind you. Here you go.
Hi, Secretary Clinton. I was wondering what you think about securing the Mexican border with some of the illegal immigrants that come in. Just wondering.
Well, look, I voted numerous times when I was a senator to spend money to build a barrier to try to prevent illegal immigrants from coming in. And I do think you have to control your borders. But I think that it's also true that we need to do more to try to, number one, deal with the people who are already here, many of whom have been here for decades, because it is just never going to happen that we're going to round up and deport 11 or 12 million people. I don't care how tall the wall is or how big the door is. That is never going to happen. And I think it is an unnecessarily provocative thing to say. We need to secure our borders. I'm for it. I voted for it. I believe in it. And we also need to deal with the families, the workers who are here, who have made contributions, and their children. And we also, Mexican immigration no longer is really the issue. The Mexican economy is doing well enough. We've had no net Mexican immigration in the last several years. We now get immigrants from Central America and Latin America. And a lot of them make a very dangerous trip with smugglers and traffickers to try to get into our country. And we need to do more to try to put some resources into those countries to try to deal with some of the conditions, particularly the violence, the drug dealers and the like, that create that. And we have an example of how effective the United States can be. When my husband was president, as you remember, there was a war going on in Colombia by drug traffickers and insurgent rebels. It was such a violent war that elected officials, business leaders, academics were being kidnapped, many of them murdered, others held for ransom. And we did something called Plan Colombia, where we helped the government figure out how to secure their country from drug traffickers and rebels. And it took a number of years, but now it's a success story. So we can do more to stop the problem from where it starts. We can do more to secure our border, and we should do more to deal with the 11 or 12 million people who are here, get them out of the shadows, because we will have a better economic outcome if we do that, because what happens now is if you're undocumented, you will work for as little as you can be paid, and that influences the labor market and takes away jobs from Americans because there's no even playing field. If we get them out of the shadows and we enforce the labor laws, we will see a much better labor market for Americans, and we will also see much more contribution into the Social Security and Medicare system, as well as the taxes. I mean, right now, we know that undocumented workers pay into the Social Security system many billions of dollars, but it could be even more. So, yeah, we have to do all of that. And to talk about just one piece of it, I think, is misleading and doesn't help us get to where we can solve the problems that we face. Yes, yes.
Thank you. Social Security you touched on. Well, this is the third year that Social Security recipients have not got a raise. And with prices going up all the time, remember, these are the seniors that built the fire stations and the police stations and served their country.
Deserve a retirement security contract with our seniors. And I mention it because before we get to the point of what we're going to increase, and the fact that Social Security is not a sufficient form of income support for the poorest, most vulnerable people on Social Security. So I think we do have to address the broader issue, but I am particularly concerned about widows and single women and caregivers, to go back to the Alzheimer question, who are not getting enough money right now to get by. So I think we have to look at this, and I am open to how we can do it best and where the money would come from so that we provide the kind of continuing financial support that people on Social Security deserve to have. And the COLA is a part of it, and the lack of monthly support for a significant number of people who are on it is also an issue. Those are the two issues that I want to address. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, the lady right, yes, that lady right there.
Awesome. So I actually have a list of questions, but I've decided I have the most important one to me. So you've talked about substance abuse, and you've talked about all of the medical stuff, but personally, there's a large issue in our country with heroin. and nobody's actually talking about it. And so I would like for somebody to finally step up and talk about it, especially it's hitting this age range of 24 to about 35 and way too often.
You're right. And I've had 2 town halls here in New Hampshire, one in Laconia, one at Keene State a few weeks ago, where the only subject was addiction, substance abuse. Actually, I think it was Laconia, and where was the other one? Where? Yeah, Manchester, I think. It was upstate, yeah. And I totally agree with you. We have a heroin epidemic, and it is predominantly affecting young people. And it is, in large measure, a result of the opioid prescription drug epidemic. Too many opioid prescriptions for too long have been handed out too freely. And we have to recognize that opioids are addictive, and then they are expensive. So heroin has come in as the substitute. And so that's one of the reasons why people are getting addicted to heroin. And oftentimes they don't even know what's in the heroin. There's a drug called fentanyl, which is the killer in a lot of the heroin, the way it's mixed now. And so here, I've come out, go to my website, hillaryclinton.com. I've come out with a comprehensive anti-addiction program, more treatment, more recovery programs, working with physicians so that they are more sensitive to their prescribing of opioids, working with law enforcement to try to intervene, equipping law enforcement with the antidote to a heroin overdose, Narcan, so that they can save lives. And hundreds of lives have been saved here in New Hampshire in the last few years, where with the police departments who are using it. So I just, Marty Walsh and I did a town hall in Boston because he was very open about being a recovering alcoholic, and we had, along with the Attorney General, we had a town hall in Boston about these issues. I have to say, when I started my campaign, I did not think I would be talking so much about addiction or rolling out a whole plan about it. And then people started talking to me. The first time I came to New Hampshire, I went to Keene, and I met with a small group in a little cafe, and a retired doctor said, well, I want to hear about all your other plans, but first I want to ask you, what are you going to do about the heroin epidemic? And I didn't even know there was a heroin epidemic here in New Hampshire. The governor of Vermont, Governor Shumlin, came over and did a town hall with me. He supports me, but he's also been trying to deal with the heroin epidemic in Vermont. This is a broad and growing crisis, and we've got to recognize it for what it is, and then we've got to figure out how to prevent it, and we've got to do more education of young people who have to understand that, this is deadly, and there are too many examples of it for people to take a chance. So this is, at every one of my town halls, somebody will say to me, thank you for talking about it. I lost my son. I lost my daughter. And I've met grandmothers in New Hampshire that are taking care of their grandchildren because their children overdosed or their children are lost to drug addiction and unable to be responsible parents. So this is a problem. And I hope that people will really ask in your own communities what you can do to try to deal with it, to prevent it, and to better treat it. So, oh my goodness. Yeah, that young woman right there. Yeah. Here comes the microphone.
Marina, which Republican candidate are you hoping will run against you, and why?
Well, in keeping with the very fair points made by the woman in the hat, I'm not going to get involved in their primary. I am really interested in how it's going, and I want to see what Republicans decide, but I want to say that any Republicans who think we can do better, please consider voting for me. I am very hopeful that we can get more bipartisanship into the election, so I'll have to wait and see. Okay. Yeah, this gentleman right there. Yes. Here comes the microphone.
Good evening, Hillary.
Good evening.
You've addressed most of the issues tonight here that most of us here are concerned about. So I'd just like to make a comment, and my comment is that I commend you for running for this office, given the energy, the time you have to put into it, and also the scrutiny you have to face, such as Benghazi recently. And listening to you tonight, I know who I'm going to vote for president because you have the strength to bring our country forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. This young man in the blue and white shirt right there. Yeah. I'm always happy to see young people at these events. I'm really glad they came. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I've noticed that many companies in America are making, like drug companies are making legal substances that are very lethal. And I've noticed that some of them are using our country as a base so they can move into other countries and start selling them there. And there's some proven information that they're actually lying to those countries, saying that they're good and they can be good for you when they're really harmful.
Let me just quickly say, the biggest example of that are not the drug companies, but the tobacco companies. You know, the tobacco companies have been very aggressive in trying to sell their products overseas and to make alliances with governments of countries where they could get into the market. On some of the drugs that you're talking about, it's not so much the drugs that go through our process, the FDA process. It's drugs that might be not subjected to that and yet exported from our country that I think you're concerned about. They haven't been proven to be safe or effective or suitable for certain purposes, and yet they are exported as though they were. And that is a problem. So it's something that we have to address. And it goes with my overall plan to try to reform the way drugs are sold in America. And the other thing that happens, you know, we have no standards for supplements at all. And a lot of people are taking huge amounts of supplements, and they are looking at the ads or they're reading the label, and it says you'll get energy or you'll get to sleep better or whatever, and there is no real testing for it. And then when it comes to marijuana, a lot of states have passed medical marijuana, and I support that. But I also support research so that we know more about what works and what doesn't work. And we're not doing it because marijuana is listed as a Schedule I drug, which means you cannot even do research. So I want it to be listed as a Schedule II drug so we can start finding out what does it really do and how does it help people and how do we get some standard of quality and purity, because there are so many different forms of marijuana that are grown in all kinds of places. And if you are suffering from nausea with chemotherapy, what's the best kind to use? Nobody can tell you because we've never done the research. So I think your question is a larger question about how we get more information and more research, and we try to give that information to people, particularly doctors, so better decisions can be made both here and around the world. So thank you. Yeah, right there. Yes, that lady right there.
Secretary Clinton, I have a question. I'm a school nutrition director, so I'm going to change gears a little bit. And I know that you support, I'm sure that you support Michelle Obama's initiatives for school nutrition programs. My question to you